L'Assemblée va entendre
The General Assembly will now hear a statement by His Excellency Mr. Choguel Kokalla Maïga, Prime Minister and Head of Government of the Republic of Mali. I request protocol to accompany His Excellency.
au nom de l'Assemblée générale.
On behalf of the General Assembly, it is my honor to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Mr. Choguel Kokalla Maïga, Prime Minister and Head of Government of the Republic of Mali. And I invite him to take the floor. President of the General Assembly, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government, Secretary General of the United Nations, ladies and gentlemen, at the outset I should like to address you with the brotherly greetings of the African people of Mali and the greetings of the Transitional President, Head of State, His Excellency Colonel Assimi Goïta. I should also like, on their behalf and on my own behalf, President, to address the warmest congratulations of the delegation of Mali to you for your brilliant election to the presidency of this 76th session of the General Assembly. I also congratulate your predecessor, His Excellency Volkan Bozkır of the Republic of Turkey, for the remarkable way in which he led the work of the 75th session of the General Assembly. Allow me also to reiterate our highest appreciation for the laudable efforts of our Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, for the laudable efforts that he continues to deploy to achieve the noble objectives of our organization. President, the 76th regular session of the General Assembly is based very appropriately on the theme of hope, the hope of building resilience to recover from COVID-19 in a spirit of responsibility, cooperation and solidarity. The hope of a safer world, a world of human security, the hope that the Sahel returns to stability and becomes once again a haven of peace and a hub of growth and development. Finally, the hope of the revitalization of the United Nations. Mali fully endorses both the spirit and the letter of this theme, which perfectly encapsulates the ideals of our organization. It is a truism to say that Mali and the countries of the Sahel are today facing a many-headed serpent of terrorism, violent extremism and instability that has been going on for over a decade, with the risk of stagnation, trivialization or fatigue, which risk seeing these issues fall off the international agenda. Coming on top of our daily dose of fears and tragedy, COVID-19 brought with it many negative impacts upon our economy and our people's living conditions, which were already buffeted due to economic, political and humanitarian challenges. Rarely has a country or region been as sorely tested by crises as Mali and the Sahel states have been. It is in this difficult context that the people of Mali, following several months of popular upheavals, has chosen a different direction for our country and has placed all its hope in the political transition process currently underway, which they are the principal drivers of. The transitional government, which I have the honour of leading since the 11th of June 2021, is made up of representatives of all forces in Mali. Notably, in the interest of inclusivity, it includes members of the signatory movements of the Agreement for Peace and Reconciliation in Mali, the outcome of the Algiers process, and representatives of political and social forces in our country. As soon as we assumed our posts, we began to work together to draw up an action plan for the transitional government, which contains a whole number of measures whose implementation will ensure the tackling of the main concerns of our people who are so bruised by the security, political, health and economic crisis. This Government Action Plan, adopted on the 2nd of August 2021 by the National Transitional Council, the transitional legislative body, has 4 main axes. It is accompanied by a timeline for implementation and a provisional budget. The first axis of the government's action plan posits security as a high priority. This responds to the deep aspiration of our people for peace, calm, peaceful coexistence and social cohesion. Indeed, despite the undeniable successes achieved by the Malian armed forces and their allies, to whom I pay tribute, the threats posed by terrorism and other forms of crime, including cross-border crime, continue, alas, to afflict our people on a daily basis and to jeopardize the very foundations of our state. Between March 2012 until the 25th of September 2021, today, as I speak to you from this august tribune, the situation in my country has scarcely improved, despite international support and the presence on our territory of the UN peacekeeping operation, MINUSMA, and international forces such as the French Operation Barkhane, the European Takuba Force, and the G5 Sahel Joint Force. The situation continues to deteriorate gradually, to the extent that whole areas of our national territory have escaped from government control. My fellow citizens are living in the grip of armed terrorist groups who deny them their most elementary rights. Their access to basic services remains merely hypothetical because of the lack of state services resulting from the increasing insecurity. MINUSMA, whose courage and contribution to Mali's stabilization I applaud here, is working in this vulnerable environment with all the resulting risks for MINUSMA. Given this disquieting situation, the government is regularly and strongly called upon by the Malian people, who are expecting more and more from their public authorities and international partners. Whilst it is established that one of the fundamental rights of our people is a right to security, the actual guarantee of this is without a doubt what gives a state legitimacy in the eyes of its citizens. President, I am saying all of this to fully illustrate the horrendous situation endured by the people in Mali. I am saying it also to invite everybody to some introspection, so as to achieve a paradigm shift in the question of security in the Sahel. Mali, as you know, hosts a United Nations peacekeeping operation, and I would once again like to pay a heartfelt tribute to all the women and men who work there under the flag of MINUSMA in difficult, often dangerous conditions, to keep the peace and to protect our civilians. I should like to recall that our organization, the United Nations, was quite right and well aware of the situation in 2013 when it decided to rightly deploy the United Nations Multidimensional Integrated Stabilization Mission in Mali, MINUSMA. Resolution 2100 of the 25th of April 2013 establishing MINUSMA stated, and I quote, that the situation in Mali was a threat to international peace and security. And it decided, as a result, to act pursuant to Chapter 7 of the Charter of the United Nations. In paragraph 16, the Resolution 2100 established the initial mandate of MINUSMA, including, and I quote, to support the transitional authorities of Mali to stabilize the key population centers, especially in the north of Mali, and, in this context, to deter threats and take active steps to prevent the return of armed elements to those areas. Resolution 2164 of the 25th of June 2014 renewed the mandate of MINUSMA for the first time for a year and stressed, I quote, that terrorism can only be defeated by a sustained and comprehensive approach involving the active participation and collaboration of all states and regional and international organizations to impede, impair, and isolate the terrorist threat." End of quote. As a result, paragraph 12 of this resolution authorized MINUSMA, and I quote, "to take all necessary means to carry out its mandate within its capabilities and its areas of deployment." In particular, under paragraph 13, it urged MINUSMA to expand its presence, including through long-range patrols and within its capacities in the north of Mali, beyond key population centres, notably in areas where civilians are at risk. President, 8 years after the deployment of MINUSMA, the above-mentioned extracts of Resolutions 2100 of 2013 and 2164 of 2014 are still burningly relevant. The people in Mali are exasperated today by the mass killings, the villages erased from the map, the innocent civilians mown down, including women and newborns who are often burnt alive. The Malian people feel that the mission of MINUSMA has changed along the way, and particularly since 2015, following the signature of the Agreement for Peace and Reconciliation resulting from the Algiers process, although the challenges justifying its deployment still remain. Indeed, contrary to the expectations of the Malian people, the environment of terrorism in which MINUSMA was deployed in 2013 has continued to worsen. Over time, it has even spread, because the armed terrorist groups who invaded almost two-thirds of our territory in 2012 have dispersed and spread without ever being wiped out. They have reformed and gained strength. It is against this backdrop of worrisome threat that the French army, through Operation Serval first and then Operation Barkhane, was authorized, in support of MINUSMA and our states, to lead the combat against terrorism in Mali. It is also against this backdrop, President, that the French Operation Barkhane has suddenly announced its withdrawal, in view, apparently, of a change or a transformation in the international coalition, whose characteristics are not yet known, at least not by my country or my people. The unilateral announcement of the withdrawal of Barkhane and its transformation did not take account of the tripartite link between us, that is, between the United Nations and Mali, as partners with France, in combating elements of destabilization. Mali regrets the fact that the principle of consultation and concertation, which should be the rule between privileged partners, was not observed upstream of the decision by the French government. The new situation resulting from the end of Operation Barkhane puts Mali before a fait accompli, abandoning us mid-flight to a certain extent, and it leads us to explore pathways and means to better ensure our security autonomously or with other partners, so as to fill the gap, which will certainly result from the withdrawal of Barkhane in the north of the country. This situation must also incite the United Nations to adopt a more offensive stance from now on the ground. President, there is no anti-MINUSMA feeling in Mali, and nor is there any anti-French feeling in our country. No, I can say that unequivocally. Our people has never been and will never be an ungrateful people. Amongst the state's highest authorities and amongst the people, there is a desire for peace and a thirst for security, which reflect the desire for effectiveness of political and military instruments and mechanisms which have been established, and which paradoxically have made Mali into an over-militarized country which is very vulnerable to terrorism. This became a factor leading to the disintegration of our societies, our states, and the destabilization of the foundations of our state itself.
What are we to do in the light of this paradox? What are we to do to dispel the anxieties, exasperation, and the anger of the Malian people? What are we to do to address the dissatisfaction of Malian people and partners? Mr. President, I would humbly note that in the light of these questions, it is incumbent upon us to have both the courage and clear-sightedness to question the above-mentioned instruments and mechanisms. We should also, and particularly, put back on the table the request for a more robust mandate and a change of approach for MINUSMA. This is regularly proposed by our government at the Security Council of the United Nations. This will enable MINUSMA's mandate to adapt. It will avail it of the means to fully deliver upon its mandate and to rise to the aspiration of the Malian people. This is an aspiration without which neither the UN mission nor international and regional military partners on our soil, without which they will not have credibility in the eyes of my fellow citizens. Put succinctly, it is incumbent upon the United Nations to help Mali more effectively combat transnational organized crime in order to create the necessary conditions for stabilization. This will set the stage for political, humanitarian, and development-related support, as well as for the protection of human rights. It is acknowledged that the situation in Mali represents a threat to international peace and security. Yet, and as a result, it is incumbent upon us to find suitable ways and means to continue to address this in a holistic, concerted, and decisive way until this threat is fully eradicated. In the ruthless war that we have been waging against terrorism, our government will continue to spare no effort to meet our international obligations vis-à-vis respect for human rights. We have given pride of place to the coordination of our partners' efforts on the ground, to regional cooperation in order to incorporate the regional dimension of the security crisis in the Sahel. This is the thrust of our commitment and engagement in the G5 Sahel Joint Force. This is also the thrust of our shared request at the G5 Sahel for a robust and adapted mandate under Chapter 7 of the United Nations Charter and for predictable and sustained financing for the G5 Sahel Force. As we seek to ensure effectiveness and cohesion, our government will undertake to establish, under my authority, a follow-up and coordination structure for MINUSMA, as well as an integrated management strategy for the crisis in the center of Mali. We will shoulder our own responsibility in stabilization. The transitional government is cognizant of the fact that this stabilization also hinges on implementation of the Agreement for Peace and Reconciliation, the fruit of the Algiers process. In the meantime, the government, signatory movements, as well as inclusivity representatives will continue to implement the agreement in a spirit of trust and accountability through a new framework which is entitled Inter-Malian Framework for Implementation of the Agreement. In this spirit, we will continue to conscientiously implement and to revise consensually the agreement, to fine-tune it. The goal sought after is to facilitate national ownership and to shore up its inclusive nature while safeguarding the necessary political and social conditions for consensus and the revision of certain provisions in line with the mechanism set out under the agreement. Turning to defense and security issues, a disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration program focuses on the integration of 3,000 former combatants from the signatory movements. This was established. Under this program, 1,840 former combatants have already been incorporated. The government has also expressed a willingness to integrate 1,160 remaining components by 21 August 2021. The delays were a result of the slow pace of the Azawad, the Azawad movement coordination body in the provision of the list of representatives. We have the forthcoming integration of former combatants into the armed and security forces, as well as government bodies and other military bodies. And the government is determined to surmount technical obstacles stemming from other parties in the parts of the agreement, specifically the signatory movements. Their joining the DDR process needs to be made a reality. Socioeconomic reintegration will initiate the activities of September 2021 with support from MINUSMA and the World Bank. I would mention the plight of Malian refugees in neighboring countries and IDPs. This is a major concern of our government. We are undertaking to create, with support from bi- and multilateral partners, to create suitable conditions for the restoration of security and dignity for our people and to ensure that they be positioned to participate in forthcoming elections. The transition underway aspires to be a turning point, heralding hope for healing Mali of the woes that have assailed it, including political instability, institutional instability, weakness of state institutions. These are direct consequences of corruption and impunity. In order to achieve this, we have decided to initiate reforms. This is the second axis of the government's action plan. These reforms go beyond political institutional questions. The reforms ultimately are geared towards refashioning the state, whose progressive decay has been caused by the vulnerability to political, economic, and social ills. My country wishes to be a solution to the crises plaguing the Sahel. My country wishes to live in peace with our neighbors, to strengthen our unity, our stability, and to restore full sovereignty over all of our territory. We wish to guarantee human security and safety within our borders by shoring up our constitutional institutions. To that end, Mali has committed to transformation through reforms into a stable and prosperous state, a state focused on welfare of our population. These reforms have been delayed for far too long for manifold reasons by successive political regimes in the past 2 decades. The transition underway under the stewardship of His Excellency Colonel Assimi Goïta has decided to adopt a robust commitment to achieve that. The head of state seeks to convene and made a commitment to that end in the next few days to convene a national foundation for foundation. The recommendations will be binding of this body, both for the current transition period and for the pursuit of public policies. The third priority is transparent, credible, and inclusive general elections to restore constitutional order in Mali. These elections are particularly important insofar as they will be the yardstick for the success of the transition. We know that the quality and credibility of the elections will determine the future of our democracy, legitimacy, and solidity of our institutions. As we draw lessons from our recent democratic practice, the government will establish an independent election monitoring body. This unique body will create the political, legal, and institutional framework for rebuilding trust in political actors and citizens during elections. This represents a major innovation to shore up democracy and the legitimacy of institutions. We are fully cognizant of the delays in the transition and of the timeline for transition and our international commitments. We are working ceaselessly to meet the timelines. To that end, the independent election body will accelerate the establishment through revision of electoral law of a direct national directorate with regional and local offices and representation in Malian embassies and consulates. To that end, there will be a roundtable to review the proposed terms of reference for the National Foundation for Refoundation. This began yesterday in Bamako. Beyond the question of the body for elections management, we will undertake to reform the election system by revising basic texts governing elections. The fourth axis of government initiatives will be to establish good governance and adopt a social stability pact. In this regard, we have undertaken to provide for transformative governance. An ongoing struggle has already begun to combat corruption and impunity, which have spawned decay of the state. These measures are underway and will continue and will be built upon. The government of transformation is now reflected in the drastic curtailing of the lifestyles of state servants to release budgetary funds to improve living conditions for ordinary people and to ensure that national wealth be distributed equitably. The president of the transition and the government have already set good examples to that, and the resources thereby released will be reallocated for basic social services in order to ensure greater justice and equality among employees and workers. The government will harmonize salary scales for public service and will initiate in short time a social conference together with social partners and business partners. We are a Sahelian country focusing on agriculture, animal husbandry, and fishing. Hence, we are very concerned by climate change, which represents one of the greatest challenges for human survival and development. My country has fully borne the nefarious consequences of climate change. This is illustrated by growing desertification and its impact on plant and wildlife, the drying up of our rivers and waterways, heat waves, floods, and this list goes on and on. For this reason, I wish to reaffirm our commitment to the implementation of the Paris Climate Agreement. Mr. President, I wish to conclude by recalling the following. The initiatives of the transitional government in Mali are focused on three pillars, which reflect the three vital needs for Mali. These are the need for security, the need for justice to combat corruption and impunity, and the need for reform. There is an overarching need to continue to endeavor to improve the security environment in Mali, with assistance from Mali's friends to backstop the efforts of the Malian Defense and Security Forces. There is also a crucial need to initiate the necessary reform to rebuild the state and to adapt the texts which govern elections to meet the needs of Malian society and to reflect changing times. There is no alternative to reforms. These are a consequence of the devastating state, and this is necessary if we wish to ensure that this great nation stand up on its feet and become stable. ECOWAS fully grasped this and in October 2018 recommended, following the fact-finding mission on the post-electoral crisis, that reform be carried out to that end. I quote, taking note of the extension of the current legislature in line with the opinion of the Constitutional Court and in the light of the broadly recognized dysfunction mentioned by interlocutors flagged by interlocutors during the past presidential election, there's a need for the government and all socio-political actors to, in a consensual manner, reach agreement on bold reform for the legal frameworks, including the February 1992 Constitution of the electoral system, in order to initiate elections that the country can carry out. I reiterate the government of the President of the Transition and the people to heads of state and government of ECOWAS for the leadership. I wish to reiterate the gratitude of our President, government, and people to heads of state and government of ECOWAS for their leadership and for their steadfast presence in support of Mali. During difficult and complicated times, we urge them to continue to have a clear-sighted view of the situation prevailing in Mali, a vast country, open on 7 borders, which is an important pillar for the entire West African region. Thank you for your kind attention.
Au nom de l'Assemblée
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank
de la République
the Prime Minister and Head of Government of the Republic of Mali for that statement, and I request protocol to accompany His Excellency.